So, in the last video, if you remember, we discussed prompt engineering. Today, I want to show you the practical side of it, of how to actually implement it and how it actually makes the results better. So let's say you want to make a cover letter and you're applying to a job. What if we give it some generic tasks like this? Write me a cover letter for my data analysis job. So it'll be something generic. It's not going to, you didn't give it any information on you as a person and what you do and what your specializations are. So, of course, this resume is pretty basic and it's pretty vague. One thing that's special about chatbots like ChatGPT is that they have cross conversation memory. That means it remembers things that we've talked about in previous conversations. So it mentions things like, for you specifically, it talks about AI projects that I've done. And this is because of the cross conversation memory. I've talked about AI projects in previous conversations, so it mentions it in my cover letter. But of course, it doesn't really have a deep analysis on what skills I have that are relevant to this data analysis job, and even asks me to include some of this information because it doesn't know me personally. Now let's implement some good prompting techniques. First, we start with a verb. We're telling it to do something, so we're telling it to write. Now it has an idea of what it should start doing. And we give some specifics. We say it has to be 200 words, we say what the role, where it is, and we give some information about ourselves. And also, we talked about tone last time. Now it knows what tone to take. Let's see how this responds. Now, as you can see, it gives a more in-depth answer based on what information we gave it, and it gives specifics, so now it's not as vague as it was before. And as you can see, it's more direct in tone, and it feels like you're talking to the person who's going to read this rather than being like, oh, I do this and I do that, and that's why I'll be good for the job. So as you can see, we used the same model, gave it the same task, but we got a completely different output just because of the way we prompted it. All we did was tell it the tone that it should have, the company that we're applying for, and background on ourselves, and it gives a much better application that a person who's reviewing this would be more likely to accept. Okay, the next task we're going to move on to is explaining a technical concept. So let's just say we don't know what APIs are, even though I covered them in the last video. Let's just say I don't know what they are, and it explains what an API is. As you can see, it gives a fast answer. It gives this technical answer over here, and it gives a little analogy. It's a kitchen analogy. It's a pretty common analogy that the model gives for an API. But let's say I don't like this response because it's just giving me a textbook definition of what it is, and it's just beginner level stuff. And like, sure, it's accurate information, but if I've never written code, I really won't understand what this is. So in this chat, instead of just asking what an API is, I ask it to explain it, and I tell it its audience. So this is very important. If I tell it its audience, it'll explain it in a different way. Now, instead of using the typical restaurant kitchen analogy, it uses this analogy with video games. So now the kid can understand because most kids play video games, and it's easier to understand. And we tell it that the kid doesn't know any programming, so instead of asking what is an API and getting a technical response back that I don't really understand, I now get a response that I could understand if I didn't know how to code. And that's why it's important to specify the audience. Once again, this is the same model and the same question, but we just add more to the question, and this makes it easier for the model to understand how we want a response to be. Okay, let's move on to the next task. Let's say that we have a string of text and we need to extract the company name, the role, and the years of experience of this person based on the text. It's pretty straightforward. It says it in the answer. But let's say I send this. So, of course, it'll give it in this table over here, and it gives us JSON. But let's say I didn't want it in this output. Well, of course, if I don't specify how I want the output to be, it's just going to give this response, and maybe I don't want JSON, and that's why it's important to specify how I want the response to be. And that's where we're going to use some fuse-shot prompting. So as you can see here, now I said I want it to be formatted like this. I want the company to be like this, the role to be like this, and the years to be like this. And I gave it 2 examples. So now, if I send in this prompt, I'll get the exact output that I want. And notice how it doesn't have any extra text around it like the previous response did. It just straight gives me the answer. So sure, the first response gave me the answer that I wanted, but it didn't give it to me in the way I wanted, and that's because I didn't specify it. So when I use this few shot prompting, which is just giving examples, it's able to fulfill the task that I give it because I sent it in a way where I tell it the structure of how I want it, which is why it's important to specify how you want an output to be, because maybe an output is accurate, but it's not what you need. These are just some of the prompting techniques that are useful to you, and if you utilize them, and if you utilize more than one at once, you'll get the best responses because you'll always be direct, you'll always give it as much information as possible. And it's important to give it as much information as possible because this information is what allows the model to perform well. The model can just give generic answers because you're just giving it generic prompts. But if you give it a prompt that's specific, if you give it as much data as possible, the model will be able to give a response that you want, either if it's the content that you want or the behavior that you want it to have. So in this video, we went over some prompting techniques. In the next video, we'll talk more about vibe coding, Claude Code, these new tools that you can use, and I'll even show you how to use them for the next few videos. But the next video will be the last lecture video, and the rest will just be demos for week 2. And then eventually we'll move on to week 3, which is, in my opinion, the most exciting because you'll learn how to build real AI apps. See you in the next video.